an adjunct professor at Columbia University. Enjoy the episode.
Sarah, it's so good to see you and so excited to have you here on the Modern Husbands podcast. Sarah, would love to hear how your work in family and couples therapy has translated into your work with organizations as well.
Thanks. So, yeah, I started working with families and individuals and couples a long time ago. And at a certain point in my career, I started to really feel a yearning to bring that work out into the world. And I sometimes share the story that actually the true story, the underneath story, is that my older daughter went to college and there was a huge void, and I was starting to spend time stalking her on the internet, which is now forever recorded, I realized. And I thought I have to get a life. And I already had a really full life, right? I have a husband, I have a younger daughter, and a practice. But I went back and got a degree as an executive coach and started to figure out how to translate the kind of work we do in the therapy room into a broader context, into the world of work. And the reason I felt like doing that is I think that, in fact, a lot of times the skills and the tools that I would ask people to bring home, their answer would be, well, I'd love to, but I'm too busy at work. So there seemed to be a need to translate what we do in therapy into the work world and start to bridge those gaps between work and home in ways that would support us as whole people, right? And so either way, whether we're talking about the organizational work, which we call bringing the innate capacities to learning how to love the way we work, whether we're doing it there at work or we're doing it at home, it comes out of the same philosophy that we all have the inner capacity to be well. And that in fact, ideally, in a world where we don't actually have enough time ever, especially after we partner and maybe have children, we really don't have enough time, that we could learn how to be well rather than do more.
Yeah, that sounds exactly like the struggles that at least we go through as a family, and a lot of my friends go through. And I know you've obviously had a career as a marriage and family counselor. And one of the things that Dr. Ross, Christian, and I thought would be beneficial for our listeners is to have a conversation around that, to make sure that our listeners walked away learning something that they can apply to their lives. So, with that as the spirit of this question, how often is the topic of role division in a family and couples therapy? How often does the topic of dividing the labor at home come up based on gender preferences, gender norms, societal norms, etc.?
Yeah, such a great question. To segue from the organizational work back into the family, I think the reality is the same, right? There's the to-do list. And my to-do list is really long, and so is yours. And now we both, in any family system or organizational system, don't understand what the other person is really doing and feel like we're doing more. Right. So your question was, how often does role come up, role and responsibility?
Yeah.
And it comes up, I think, in family systems as often as the big three, right? So the big three: money, sex, and real estate.
Okay.
Real estate.
Yeah. And there's some others that could, in-laws, that we could count in the big heavy topics. But I think actually role division is huge. And the fact is that we've made a radical transformation over a number of generations now, about 3 generations or so, from the days when gender roles, and then how we did family was really clearly defined. Then women started to go back to work. Mm-hmm. And then women started to play 2 roles or 3, where they were working full time or part-time, taking care of the kids and taking care of the house.
Or they
And
were
men were
forced
working.
into those roles, I think, a lot of the times.
What's that?
I think they were forced into those roles a lot of the times, that they were expected to take on multiple roles. It wasn't that they necessarily chose to take all those roles.
Exactly. I mean, I think in some ways, let's face it, we were modeled that womanhood and motherhood looked a certain way.
Mhm.
And so the
Yeah.
role of motherhood didn't change. The role of homemaker didn't change, but now we were working a full-time job. And to be honest, in my generation, I was the generation that was told, you can do it all. You can do everything a man can do. And
Yeah.
oh, by the way, you should also do these other things. And
Yeah.
so be as, and make the cookies, make sure you have home baked cookies and be standing at the door when your kids arrive home, but also have the power job and compete with a man at work. And so we passed through that generation, and then something really interesting started to happen. Some men started to discover either they lost a job, they weren't interested in their job, they'd made a wrong career choice and didn't really excite them, and they were the stay-at-home parent. And so we went through this really interesting shift where there's now complete role flip. But I don't think we caught up at all. So what we see as a tension point in the family therapy session is that people are still expected to play the roles that their parents modeled while they're playing another role. So we bring our modeling and our conditioning and our expectations of the past, and we levy them as judgments on our partners and in fact on ourselves. So I know I'm talking on and on. I'll say one more thing and then pause to see what you guys think. But the way I think this shows up is that women come into a room, the tension point in a therapy session with a feeling like, I feel resentful that you don't understand all that I do. I feel resentful that you're not helping me more. I feel misunderstood. And men come in, particularly if they're a man who isn't the breadwinner anymore, with a feeling that their role isn't understood and that actually they're lonely. I mean, so many stories about men on the playground, right? Sitting while women and kids form little clusters and groups. And maybe this is a phenomenon of Brooklyn, where I raised my youngest, where I raised my kids, but I would hear, yes, so the man rolls up with the stroller and nobody lets him into the circle, right? He sits on the sidelines and probably starts to feel both lonely and slightly ashamed that he's there. So I think that women and men come into this tension with a history that doesn't match up with their present reality, and they haven't figured out how to catch up. So I'm super curious, since I know all three of you in some ways have a lot of personal experience and thoughts about this. What are your thoughts on that?
You are allowed and encouraged to talk on and on when you are dropping knowledge bombs like that.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm learning a lot. Thank you. Sorry, Dr. Ross, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Christian.
No, I was just, in response to your question, Sarah, how do you experience some of those things? What struck me about what you were sharing is, you've got clients who you're working with, families, who are coming together to talk through some of these issues. And it gets me thinking about, what are some of the unspoken, challenges that I'm not necessarily broaching with an expert, let alone, with my wife, with my partner. It just, it gets my wheels turning. So I'm grateful to you for getting those wheels turning. I think sometimes it's also easy because of the, norms, historical, cultural, wherever these norms might come from. It's easy for us to autopilot into those and maybe forget or neglect, some of the challenges that I might be facing. I don't want to put this on you all, but some of those challenges that I might be facing, or we might be facing, Chelsea and I together in our relationship. So my response to your question is not an answer. I know very little about most things, but maybe it's another question that I have for myself to help deepen my knowledge and understanding of these topics.
Sarah, I think I told you earlier, I was in New Orleans this weekend, and for 4 days, Who Dey, Bengals won. But in the morning, I had to throw that in. But in the morning, there were a group of guys, we were just kind of sitting around chit chatting, and they were all on the younger side, probably, somewhere around, maybe Christian's age. And they asked what I did, and I shared what I did, and every single man, there were 4 of them, said, "Oh yeah, well, the first couple years of my marriage, I earned more, and now she's earning more." Or another one would say, vice versa for me. And what ended up coming about was that because in our modern world, women are doing great in the professional world, that it's almost becoming the norm. And in most cases, it's not like there are these permanent roles within the home anymore. Everything from the conversations I had with them and the many conversations we've had with guests and ambassadors is that there's this ebb and flow of constant change inside the home, and you just decide what makes the most practical sense. What is it that's going to give your family the most joy? And that's something that Hope and I have gone through. I spent most of my career as the breadwinner, and now we moved to Atlanta to support her career. So now, she is the breadwinner, and for myself and for the others that I've spoken to, it just makes sense. Now, is it a challenge initially? Yeah, I mean, it was actually a struggle because, society teaches us that money and masculinity are 2 of the same. And I have this like inherent desire to always be the breadwinner and to provide, not because I'm a misogynist. I just feel like that is something that I'm responsible for doing. And I felt bad about myself when, we decided to make this decision. And, at the end of the day, after, maybe a week or 2, I came to realize that it's just sensible. It's the right thing to do. And there's a lot of us out there. And that's what we're trying to do now, is we're trying to bring this community of like-minded folks together to address something, Sarah, that you brought up with that is fair, is that sometimes men in these positions are lonely.
Yes. Yeah. And what I heard you just saying is that one of the edicts or, messages we want to uncouple is masculinity and money. Just like we want to uncouple femininity and nurturing, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm listening to you talk, and I'm thinking my own personal experience. I've been married a lot of years. 20, so many that I've lost count during the pandemic, but let's say 26 or 27. And we've cycled through many a version of who was the breadwinner and who was the primary homemaker and who was the primary caregiver. And what we discovered, the most recent version of our life happened in 2008. My husband is a cabinet maker, and so he lost his work almost entirely in that recession. And I, as a therapist, did not, right? So I went from being a part-time practitioner to a full-time practitioner, and he became homemaker and super dad. And what we discovered was that he was way better at both those roles. He's really good at cooking. He's really patient. He loves to fold laundry. He's good at order. And as you could imagine, a cabinet maker would be. The same skill set he uses in a cabinet shop, he uses in a home. Okay, so it turned out after we did that flip, we realized, wait a second, if I, as a therapist, started thinking, if people could sit down together, and not just because it's practical, but actually because we all have different strengths and weaknesses, if we could use the same kind of strength indicator that is used in the workplace, in family life, and say, guess what? I'm really good at doing these 5 things, and I like them. And I'm really good at doing those, and I like them. We might be able to meet the monumental to-do list and the internal experience that I'm doing more than everybody else. We might be able to meet it with a little bit more kindness if we got creative about who played what role, based on who we are rather than based on our gender or even our experience, you know, and certainly based on what was modeled for us.
And that's the same thing we're hearing across the board for marriages, couples that do manage the home in that way. It ultimately comes down to what they each enjoy to do or they're naturally good at doing. And it's a common sense approach, right?
Yes, it's a common sense approach because it breathes a lot more vitality and life into the partnership. And for those with kids, it models something really important, I think, which is, you know, that there isn't a gender role assigned to each of these activities that we do. There's a role based on interest and willingness.
Mm.
Sarah, I love this holistic kind of perspective you're bringing to the conversation, and especially around these shifting societal roles that we have. Especially, I know we're named modern husbands. We're three guys, but you're providing that modern wives perspective. But really, I guess it's a modern partners perspective.
Yes.
You know, it's non-gendered. It's doing what you love, what you're good at, and how you can work together as a couple. And I just absolutely love all the points that you're providing for us today. I'm curious a little bit more about having that kind of role division conversation. Like, what are some of the other themes that do emerge? I know you told us a little bit about what you see when they're first coming in, but as those conversations develop, what are some of those themes that do emerge from those conversations around role division? I'm thinking maybe, is there a conversation around like work-life balance or integration of that?
Yeah, well, I would say for one, work-life balance is something that I never work with. There's two words I never work with. Work-life balance, that's not a word, a phrase, and compromise.
Okay.
So I encourage people to strike those two from the list of to-dos, right? There's no such thing as work-life balance in modern life. Is there really, if we're
No,
honest?
I totally agree. I totally agree.
I think maybe we could use a word like work-life harmony, which again gets to asking ourselves the challenging question, what do I really want to do? And how can we together be creative so I get to do that? And I'm not trying to be Pollyannic or fantastical about this. I'm aware that we have to make a living and that's hard. So there's certainly days I don't want to go to work, but I do it. So I'm not talking about that kind of wanting to do, but really what is the way that we can approach our to-do lists and the tasks at hand with openness, with curiosity, with a way where we remove the judgment. So another word I love to remove is should. I used to go to bed, I'll tell you on this personal level, with a checklist at night about what I didn't do well enough, especially as a mom. As a working mom, there's a whole long list that women carry about what they didn't do well enough. I should have gone to the school open house. I should have made the cookies. I should bring the oranges to the soccer game and I forgot them. I should. My kids are going to, and at some point it occurred to me, how is this supporting my well-being? So when I struck should away from, and I also mentioned to my partner, I hate these things. Like I hate making orange slices. Orange slices are just not a problem for him, right? He's good with a tool. And so we worked it out that way. So that was a silly example, but my point is, let's get rid of should, let's get rid of balance, let's get rid of compromise and work instead with what do you want and how can we be creative about making that happen? But that requires us to be willing to share vulnerably about what we want and admit our shortcomings to one another and support one another in that. And so the themes, back to what you've asked, I think what I really hear you asking is, what could we do differently? What do these couples that grapple with this stuff come up with as a different way of doing things? And so what this circles us back, Christian, to the work that I do in organizations, because here it's really similar. I invite couples to take some time to make sure they have natural pauses in their life. Walk together, keep date night
Yeah.
on the calendar.
Yep.
Uh, have, believe it or not, for some couples, a phone call, because that's the only time they're uninterrupted.
Mm,
Employ some of the skills that you used when you were dating. And when they say, well, we don't have time, I always remind them, actually, you found time when you
Right.
were dating, when you were very motivated, when you were in courtship mode.
it's
Stay
very
in
true.
courtship mode, right? Because you're constantly courting one another. You're constantly revealing yourselves to one another. You're constantly getting to know each other and creating a life together. So pause together and learn ways to de-escalate together. So when the feelings get really intense, start to figure out your personal vocabulary as a couple. You know, one of the tools that my husband uses is humor. It really helps me to de-escalate because I can be a bit of a hothead. My personal de-escalation tool is I need to take 3 days. It takes me full 3 days before I revisit the conversation.
Hmm.
So figure out how to pause, de-escalate, and then practice appreciation. So actually appreciate each other verbally and consciously for the things that you see, that you experience, for the meals that get cooked, for the pickup, for the person who makes the dentist appointments, for the person who is in charge of planning vacations, for the person who makes sure that you're not in a grungy hotel or that you have a vacation. Takes time to do a camping trip, whatever. You know, whatever your thing is, appreciate one another. And then stay curious. Right. The other thing that partners do is they lose curiosity because we think we actually know the answer. I know what you're going to say when I ask you to pick the kids up. I know what you're going to say when I tell you that I'm going to be home late for the 7th night in a row. Actually, you don't know. Stay curious.
Yeah, that has been in our marriage one of the things that we have struggled with a little bit because, you know, if you're married for 20 years like us, you know, there's patterns that emerge. And you know, there's it seems like every once in a while there's assumptions made, but you brought up something that I think is really important to reinforce, is that it's important to appreciate your partner for the things that they do for you. And I didn't appreciate fully what Hope did for me in our early part of our marriage, because I was always head down working and I wasn't doing those things, and I had never had experience doing those things. And so because I never had any experience doing those things, I couldn't appreciate it. And I feel like that if I were to start our marriage over, I would spend the first 2 or 3 years just kind of taking turns on different roles. So at least I had a grasp on how much time it took, and what I enjoyed, what I didn't enjoy, and the same with her. Because I personally, it wasn't something that she said to me that made me appreciate it. It was just the fact that I started to take on all these different things. And like right then I felt guilty for not showing her the kind of appreciation she deserved before I did those things. And I wish I would have done them from the beginning.
Yes, I think you hit the nail on the head. In organizational work, there's some level of organizational work that involves swapping roles, having system site. It's called system site work, right? Where you
Okay.
understand that everybody plays a different role in the system. And for a day, you will have a mock day where everybody plays a different role. And it's a powerful tool that these folks who go in and do system site give this organization, which is walk in another person's shoes for a day or a weekend. So I'm often encouraging my couples to do that, to find a way. For example, for the person who's entirely in charge of the children, I encourage them to leave the building, leave the house, go away for the weekend, give your partner a chance to grapple with the problems that occur that you deal with every day.
And they can't call, right? They can't call asking for help. Right? Because that's what your advice was great. And Hope would do that early in our relationship. And usually within 15 minutes, she would receive some sort of text, and and then the floodgates opened.
Yeah, let me tell you rule number 2, though. I used to leave when back when I played the role of more of the stay-at-home parent. I would leave for the weekend, and when I came back, I would discover a trail of tortilla chips leading from the kitchen to the living room, and I would want to lose my mind, right? Because this is not a vegetable, and it was on the floor, and those were two things that I didn't agree with, right? I thought the kids should eat vegetables on a plate, and so. But the other thing is you have this really interesting, which brings us to the next, you had mentioned it earlier, flexibility. Whether we're talking in the micro level of the moments when your partners take on the roles that you usually play, or in the macro level of when you have a conversation, a hard one about whose career gets to go first right now, and who's staying home, or who's moving, right? Be flexible, because it's a journey. It's such an exciting journey. I mean, I'm sure if I asked each of you, you married 20 years, me 27, and then the newly married, did you ever expect it to be this way? Did you ever expect to have it turn out this way? The answer is usually no.
No.
And there's this great marriage theorist, one of the many, named Snarch. His last name is Snarch, which I love his name. And Snarch calls marriage a people growing machine. And I use that concept all the time to help people move past the fantasy that my partner completes me, that my partnership is entirely going to be a romantic episode of, sunshine and rainbows, that my partner's there to help me at all times, right? Those are the things, the illusions without which I'm not sure we would ever partner, right? So they're a good thing that they exist, and we get partnered with those illusions, and then reality comes in. And in reality, we wouldn't usually stick around for the level of conflict we find in partnership. And in that crucible, the tension that's caused by that, like I made a commitment to this person and I'm now really not happy and we're not getting along, in that crucible, we get to learn and grow. We get to play roles we never thought we'd play. We get to face feeling lonely and admitting it. We get to face the shoulds that we carry around inside of us towards our partner and ourselves, and release our judgment. We get to grow.
So if a spouse is experiencing those frustrations and pain, and you just look at that as a growth opportunity for that spouse.
Exactly.
That explains why my wife has grown so much. She is tolerated quite a bit.
She's growing every day, right?
She is. She's growing every day. She's going to grow even more when she listens to this podcast.
Yeah. Now you can tell her that when you, I don't know what your bad habits are, but you could let her know those are growth opportunities.
That's it. No, I like that.
That's a great reframe.
Her name's Snarch taught you, Old Snarch. What's the gentleman's first name?
William Snarch.
Oh, Willie Snarch.
Yeah.
He got you on the right track.
Yeah. People growing machines.
Huh. Instead of being snarky, we should be
snarchy.
Snarchy.
Now, I know there was something Christian wanted to ask you, but before he does, I've got to ask, and I feel a duty to ask on behalf of many men. Is there a right or wrong way to fold the laundry? Because I tried to take that task on, and apparently folding towels has to be done a certain way, matching socks. Is there something taught that is not taught to men of a particular technique, or is it just something that I should get past and fold towels as my wife says?
Yes and yes.
Okay. Apparently it's a big deal.
What you just modeled is exactly what I try to encourage. That to me is staying curious, right? So
yeah,
staying curious, like, hey, we're having some friction about these towels or about this laundry folding. what's your expectation? Where did this come from? What's the logic behind it? And I think it's very funny that you asked, because I will share that I was taught to fold towels in thirds. And I was very precisely taught this by my mother. And my husband liked to fold them in half. And so we had to have a dialogue about this very topic. And the fact is, they fit better on the shelf in thirds. So there was the reason, but he actually needed the
Totally agree
reason
there,
before he
Sarah.
was going to give me some buy-in on that.
Wow. So there's a strategy. Y'all are better than me because I just don't care. And so it was more of like, she said, I'll just do the laundry. Fine. I'll do everything else. You just handle the laundry, because I'm never going to do this in a way where anyone cares. It looks like that she does such a good job when you open up the closet. It looks like that she has folded the towels and then ironed them. That's
Yes,
how neatly they're placed.
I appreciate her. I would appreciate her if I were you. And
Yes.
and what I would say is, again, you're modeling something that circles back to our earlier conversations, which is play to your strengths, right? We all have them.
Well, she has more than me, but anyhow, Christian, what were you going to say, Christian?
No, I think, Sarah, I think you already have touched on a lot of what I was seeking with this question, but any other solutions our listeners can use to work through any of these challenges that can accompany, especially these like inflection points where maybe the roles are switching, right? Maybe one is becoming more of a larger breadwinner for the couple, and the other is taking more of a home keeper sort of role. Like those switching points, I imagine that those can be really sticky. So what are some solutions specifically during those inflection points?
I love the question. What I would say is make it discussable, right? So back to pausing, making sure there's time for adult conversation in your partnership. Make whatever conflict or assumptions you have, make it discussable. So enter into a dialogue, ask questions, be curious. And some of the time, I think that it's also important to do something which I call state the obvious, which is, in other words, something that sounds something like, hey, this is a really tough impasse for us. I think we're really up against it here. And so it diffuses the us and them and puts everybody into the same, it normalizes the conflict, puts everybody in the same boat. Yeah, we're really in it right now.
That's a good suggestion.
It begins to help people practice acceptance. And then the other thing I would say is a concept that I learned early on in psych school, I think, was there was a man named Winnicott, and he had this concept, which was, the history of this concept actually follows the trajectory of what we've been talking about. At the time that he thought up the concept, it was called good enough mothering, because mothers were almost completely in charge of raising children alone. I have reframed it through the years to be good enough parenting, but it can actually also be reframed as good enough partnering. And the concept is this: it means that when I read it, I didn't have kids. I was in school. I was young. And I thought, well, I'm not going to be a good enough mother. I'm going to be an excellent mother. Who is this guy? What is he talking about? Like, the goal is to be excellent at mothering, and everything else I do, not good enough, right? But when we can work with that idea of good enough, let's apply it first to kids. It means that the kids have a just enough of an experience of being met and heard, and their needs are addressed, that they feel safe and secure, and they experience just enough disappointment that they learn how to function in the world.
Yep.
And again, the same thing applies to the way we relate to ourselves. What if you were just allowed to be good enough at what you do? it frees you up from perfectionism and internal criticism in a way that I think allows you to be even better. And what if partners were allowed themselves and their partner to be good enough? Rather than having to live under the myth of the perfect marriage. Hey, we're just here together trying to work this out, two human people who are imperfect. We're doing good enough.
Yeah, because life's messy, right? I mean, there's
Right.
I thought, before getting married, I guess I had like this vision of a perfect marriage. And my parents were amazing, but they probably sheltered me from a lot of it. I know they sheltered me from a lot of challenges they were facing. And boy, man, when you're in the thick of it, particularly if you have kids and you're in year 20, it just feels like you're spending half your time like dodging bullets and just trying to make it to the end of the day.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what books you've read. I used to think, I've read all these books. I'm going to use all these different strategies. No problem. Boy, have I been humbled. So this has been a great conversation, Sarah. I know that our listeners are going to enjoy it. I can't wait to get this up and out and share your great advice and wisdom, because people, ultimately are going to walk away feeling like they're just a little bit smarter. They're able to handle things a little bit better. So with that as context, we like to end our podcast with just a simple question. If you had to whittle down what you think is most important for our listeners to hear based on today's conversation to, a 15-second, elevator conversation, a few sentences, what would that be?
Oh my gosh, impossible. But I will say this, as I'm looking at the three of you doing this incredible work in the world, it occurred to me that from my perspective, boys and men are in crisis right now.
Yeah, agreed.
Suicide rates for young boys are high, addiction to screens high.
Yep.
And this is, I think, because the clear path to success has been changed.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever we change the way that we do identity, I think there's a period of real disruption.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just wanting to appreciate all three of you for the work you do, and to say that the first step always is acknowledging what is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So acknowledging this is we've had a lot of incredibly important messaging for women, which I'm a woman and I stand by, with the past numbers of movements around Me Too and feminism and all of the work that's being done, which is essential and important. And I think it's important to acknowledge the crisis for men and boys that's going on and do good work around it, which I again appreciate you all doing.
That means very much to us. Thank you so much. And thanks for being on today.
Thanks.
Christian, Dr. Ross, and I thank our listeners and our guest. Please be sure to go to modernhusbands.com, where you can subscribe to our podcast. You can listen to our podcast in whatever platform you prefer: Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, or even on YouTube. Until next time, be well.